The tale of the Noxirels begins with one particularly peculiar figure, Servaine Noxirel. Frail and confined to her grand but lonely mansion, Servaine spends most of her days lying in bed, her world small and quiet, except for one radiant beacon of joy, a breathtakingly beautiful merman. Oh, how she cherishes him! So much so that she decides to keep him all to herself, trapping him in a lake like some overly enthusiastic aquarium enthusiast with questionable ethics. How, exactly, did she manage that? Well, patience, dear listener, that's a story for another time. Right now, a curious little girl sits wide-eyed as her grandfather spins this tale, her mind buzzing with questions. She's quick to point out a glaring flaw in the arrangement. Mermaids belong in the salty embrace of the ocean, not a stagnant lake. Wouldn't that make his new home less of a romantic getaway, and more of an underwater house arrest? Sharp kid, Grandpa chuckles, though a sudden cough interrupts his amusement. After a moment, he pats her head, and with an odd smile, muses that she bears an uncanny resemblance to the very same Servaine Noxirel from his story. Coincidence? Perhaps, but stories have a funny way of coming full circle. Wide-eyed but far from oblivious, young Servaine Noxirel is no stranger to her grandfather's constant remarks about how much she resembles his long-lost niece. Honestly, at this point, she could recite his musings by heart, not that she minds too much. After all, it's probably why they named her after the woman in the first place. Our female lead is the great-granddaughter of an old man whose memories flicker like a candle in the wind, yet one thing remains stubbornly fixed in his mind: the Noxirel family story. Every time he sees her, he's transported back to a time long before hers, and once again, he tells her the tale. Little Servaine listens, though she struggles to believe in the fantastical notion that a real merman once existed. If such a creature had ever swum in the depths of her family's past, surely there'd be some proof by now, right? Well, time has a way of answering the questions we don't know we are asking. 10 years later, the girl is grown, no longer little Servaine, but a woman standing in the very mansion that once belonged to her namesake. And for reasons she can't quite grasp, she's trapped here, whether by fate or by choice, she isn't sure. All she knows is that she's utterly consumed with finding the name of someone who lived more than a century ago. Then, footsteps, a voice calls to her from the stairs, deep and unmistakable, sending a shiver through her bones. The sound of it grips her heart, and as she turns to face the man standing there, her great-grandfather's words flood back into her mind. The old man had spent years weaving tales of mermen and other mystical beings hiding among humans, yet he never left behind a single solid clue to truly satisfy Servaine's curiosity. Now, a decade older, that curiosity has only grown sharper, and she can't shake the relentless urge to uncover the truth, to find the elusive merman that lingers in the deepest corners of her mind. Then, out of nowhere, a young man steps forward, seizing her hands with an urgency that sends a jolt through her. His grip is firm, his gaze intense, and the words that spill from his lips leave her breathless. He asks why it took so long to return to him, voice heavy with longing. He speaks of missing her, aching for her, as he caresses her hands with a touch so full of desire, it makes her head spin. Our female lead's heart pounds. Is this him? The very creature her great-grandfather spoke of time and time again. The idea is absurd, impossible even, yet the thought refuses to leave her mind. And worse, what if he has been waiting all this time, not out of love, but for revenge? The merman had been trapped, abandoned, and now she has returned. Before she can unravel her thoughts, another scene unfolds. A procession of maidservants and a nobleman make their way to her chambers, their arms heavy with lavishly wrapped gifts. Then, a young man steps forward, his presence impossible to ignore, and with a voice as grand as his entrance, he boldly declares he's come bearing gifts. Because nothing says welcome back quite like a dramatic delivery and an air of mystery. Servaine isn't interested in whatever gifts the Duke has brought, and she makes that very clear. But he's persistent, practically pleading for her attention, swearing that these gifts are unlike anything he's ever offered before. As the eldest daughter of the esteemed, and let's be honest, slightly unhinged Noxirel family, she's long since learned how to endure these kinds of interactions. He launches into a dramatic retelling of his struggles to acquire these so-called treasures, and for a fleeting moment, she almost cares. But then the thought creeps in, why does any of this matter when she'll die one day anyway? Still, she humors him, allowing him his moment, only to be thoroughly unimpressed by the grand reveal. Whatever he expected her reaction to be, it certainly wasn't the mix of mild disgust and reluctant amusement now gracing her face. The gifts are, in a word, repulsive. And yet, she throws him a smile, if only because her gaze has drifted past him, locking onto another young man standing not too far away. Ah yes, madness must run in the family, and Servaine is no exception. Servaine's childhood had never been what one might call ordinary. Even as a small girl, she had a habit of poking her nose where it didn't belong, a trait that had once led her straight to an off-limits room, a place she was absolutely, under no circumstances, supposed to be. Naturally, she had a perfectly good reason for breaking the rules. She just wanted to see her mother. According to hushed whispers in the halls, the woman was gravely ill, and in Servaine's young mind, it only made sense that a daughter should be allowed to visit her own mother. But the stern-faced young man guarding the door had other ideas. He blocked her path, expression unreadable, and insisted she couldn't go in. Too unwell, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Any disturbance might worsen her condition. A reasonable explanation, sure. Logical, even. But our female lead, despite being a child, had already learned that adults had an annoying tendency to hide things. And something about the way he spoke, so rehearsed, so final, made her tiny fingers curl into fists. Even then, she knew, this wasn't the whole story, not even close. In truth, Servaine's mother isn't just sick, she's chained. Shackled in her own room like some tragic, forgotten relic of her father's obsession. The day little Servaine dares to approach, the door is slammed so hard in her face that the sound echoes in her bones. Overwhelmed, she stares at the closed door, trying to make sense of it all. She's always known that her mother has been frail since childbirth, too weak to even leave the room. But is she actually sick, or is that just another lie? Servaine has her doubts. From what she's seen, her parents' marriage has never been built on love, no, what binds them together is something much darker. It's obsession, raw and unrelenting, and Servaine, young as she is, swears she will never make someone she loves feel trapped like this. But even as she tries to push these thoughts away, they gnaw at her. If they truly wanted to keep her mother safe, why imprison her like this? Why strip her of her freedom under the guise of protection? At some point, her father tells her, in a voice far too calm, that her mother's greatest wish was for her beloved daughter to be cared for. The words don't comfort Servaine, they only make her stomach twist with something dangerously close to rage. What kind of care was this? Years of isolation, of being treated as something fragile, something controllable. She doesn't just dislike it, she despises it. And as time passes, as the weight of her reality presses heavier on her shoulders, she finds herself changing. Hope is a concept she no longer understands, something distant and unattainable. Instead, all she knows is anger. The kind that simmers beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any given moment. It makes her volatile, restless, always on edge. If this is the life she's been forced into, then fine, she'll meet it with fire. Rage smolders in Servaine's heart, and she doesn't bother to hide it. She makes it painfully clear, she wants nothing from her father, no gifts, no gestures, nothing. Yet, despite herself, she can't help but wonder what he's brought this time. He stands across from her, an eerie, almost unhinged grin twisting his face. A massive object, draped in a vibrant, almost tauntingly cheerful veil, looms beside him. The anticipation is thick in the air as he grips the veil, relishing the moment before the grand reveal. Servaine, unimpressed and unwilling to play along, clenches her jaw and squeezes her eyes shut. I don't need anything from you, she snaps, voice sharp and unwavering, demands he leaves her alone. Her father doesn't waver, doesn't even flinch at her outburst. Instead, his grin deepens as he assures her, with maddening confidence, that this time, she will like his gift. He instructs her to stay calm, and before she can protest further, he rips away the veil with a flourish. The air shifts, Servaine's eyes snap open, and what she sees nearly knocks the breath from her lungs. A massive tank, water rippling and inside, floating weakly yet undeniably alive, a merman. For a long moment, she can do nothing but stare, her mind struggling to process the impossible. The creature's eyes flutter open, glassy yet piercing, and in that instant, their gazes lock, her breath catches, her world tilts. She turns sharply to her father, her expression a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. He, on the other hand, looks as casual, as if he'd just presented her with another expensive trinket. He knows this is a big deal to her, far bigger than she can even begin to comprehend. Servaine's legs threaten to give out beneath her, she stares, unable to look away. This isn't like the lifeless stuffed animals he's gifted her before, the hollow gestures she's learned to expect. This is something entirely different, this is real. Her father, ever the theatrical storyteller, claims he caught the merman in the sea closest to their mansion. He even throws in a poetic flourish, describing the nearby cliff, a place not too far from their home, offering an unrivaled view of the vast, open sea. But that's all just background noise to Servaine. Right now, her mind is utterly consumed by the breathtaking sight before her. With a smug grin, her father gestures toward the tank and asks what she thinks of her gift. Even through the water's haze, the merman's deep blue eyes glow with an eerie, otherworldly light, his pale skin gleaming like polished pearl, and his silver-blue scales shimmering as if the moon itself had been caught in them. Servaine is frozen, can't blink, can't breathe. She's completely, hopelessly starstruck. For years, she had dismissed her great-grandfather's wild tales as nothing more than the ramblings of an old man, yet here, right before her eyes, stands undeniable proof of those very myths. At first, she is paralyzed, her mind drowning in an avalanche of emotions too vast to untangle. And then, like a snapped thread, the tension breaks. Shock melts into an almost manic, breathless laughter before twisting into something far stranger, actual gratitude. Real, unfiltered appreciation. With a spark of wild excitement in her gaze, she turns to her father, and, to the astonishment of everyone present, genuinely thanks him for the gift. But the air remains heavy with unspoken questions, the most pressing one curling at the edges of her mind: what happens now? What does it mean to own something, someone, this magnificent? And more importantly, who, in this equation, is truly the captive? A new day dawns over the Noxirel manor, its heavy silence broken only by the soft rustling of curtains in our female lead's room. She steps up to the enormous fish tank dominating the space and greets its lone occupant, a merman, gliding just beneath the surface, his shimmering tail catching the light like liquid silver. Our girl tilts her head, openly admiring his beauty, though she finds it almost unfair that even in captivity, he manages to look effortlessly majestic while she's been stuck in this miserable manner looking like she just crawled out of a gothic novel. His eyes, an eerily familiar shade, stop her cold. The exact color of her late mother's eyes, soft, haunting, and filled with something unspoken. It's unsettling, yet she doesn't look away. Instead, she gestures toward a preserved bird, its once vibrant feathers now frozen in time, and assures the merman she had nothing to do with its tragic fate. Her father, in his infinite wisdom, has a habit of giving her gifts that seem more suited for a haunted museum than a daughter, as if stuffing dead things and handing them over is supposed to scream, "I care about you." She sighs and turns back to the merman, speaking as though he actually cares about the sordid details of her life. Her mother was a miserable woman, and if our female lead has learned anything from watching her fade away, it's that love and cages seem to go hand in hand. Not that she would know much about either, she's never stepped foot beyond these walls, never seen the ocean, though she's certain it must be just as breathtaking as the creature before her. She confesses her dream of swimming in the open sea, of freedom, of something, anything, beyond this suffocating existence. Even if it kills her, she'd rather that than die slowly like her mother. Looking at the merman, she wonders if he can speak, if he has his own tragic tale to tell, or if she's doomed to do all the talking. It's been days since he was placed in her care, and yet, she still can't look away. Something about him feels like the beginning of something she never saw coming. Our female lead buries herself in her books, poring over anatomy diagrams of merfolk with the determination of a scholar, or a mad scientist. Every illustration confirms what she already suspects: the creature has lungs, a throat, and vocal cords. By all logic, it should be capable of speech, and if it refuses, well, she has ideas. Unethical, sure, but she's been locked in this house long enough to develop a questionable sense of morality. If it comes down to it, she's not above pulling him out of the tank, just long enough to force his lungs into action. Maybe a little light suffocation will do the trick. Of course, she'd prefer not to go full villain, but if she has to get creative, so be it. Just as she's about to put her absolutely well-thought-out plan into action, a voice soft yet powerful cuts through the room. Her breath catches, he speaks, and just like that, her brief descent into madness halts. Our girl wipes away the stray tears clinging to his face and beams at him like a proud parent. Not only is he cooperative, but his voice is far more enchanting than she ever imagined, like a song laced with magic. 1 month passes, and while their conversations remain infrequent, she clings to every word he offers. But something else gnaws at her. He hasn't eaten, not once, unsure of what merfolk even consume. She's tried offering him fish, but instead of eating them, he's turned them into his personal entourage. At this point, she half expects him to start naming them. He finally gives her his name, Mel, but after that, the words taper off. Silence takes over again, and our female lead finds herself growing restless. He spoke once. She'll just have to figure out what it takes to make him do it again. Our female lead leans against the fish tank, her fingers drumming against the glass as her wild eyes flicker with barely contained frustration. It's been a month, 30 whole days, since Mel was dropped into her life, and not once has he taken a single bite of food. Worse, he's shut her out completely, withholding that gorgeous voice she once cherished. The silence is gnawing at her, clawing at the edges of her sanity. She has tried patience, she has tried kindness, now, her thoughts are turning to more unorthodox methods. How far is our girl willing to go? A small, utterly deranged part of her even considers tearing out his scales just to get a reaction. Surely, that would make him speak, but the darker idea is shoved aside by a far more pressing fear: what if he dies? The question latches onto her, burrowing into her chest like a parasite. Her stomach twists at the thought. No, she can't let that happen. Our girl won't let that happen. It's too familiar, too much like watching her mother waste away, slipping further and further until there was nothing left. A deep, simmering rage bubbles up, and before she even realizes what she's doing, she grabs the nearest book and hurls it at the tank. The loud thud echoes through the room, sending a sharp jolt through the water, and Mel flinches, his tail flicking in alarm. Servaine is already stalking forward, her voice rising as she presses both hands against the glass, her emotions spilling over. She will befriend him, she will hear his voice again. She swears it promises him everything, anything he could possibly want, except for freedom. That, she can never give him. The moment those words leave her lips, she realizes how true they are. Because now that she has him, she's never letting him go. The muffled screams from within Lady Noxirel's chambers send a ripple of unease through the guards stationed outside. Exchanging wary glances, they don't hesitate. One of them throws the doors open, ready for anything, well, almost anything. What they find instead is chaos. Books litter the floor, pages torn and scattered like fallen leaves. A shattered vase spills its remains across the expensive carpet. And in the center of it all, Servaine stands fuming, her chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. The tension in the air is thick enough to choke on. One of the guards, ever the brave soul, hesitantly asks if the merman has upset her, but Servaine's response is swift and brutal, a sharp command to leave. No explanations, no justifications, just pure, seething rage burning in her gaze. It's more than enough to send them retreating without another word. That evening, the butler recounts the incident to the Duke, her father, his voice laced with the kind of carefully measured concern that only years of servitude can perfect. This unraveling, this growing obsession, it isn't normal. Not for the young mistress, and certainly not for anyone unfortunate enough to be born into this cursed family. But the Duke barely acknowledges him, waving a dismissive hand, as if the matter is little more than an inconvenience. Keep quiet about it, he orders, his tone leaving no room for argument. No word of his daughter's worsening state is to leave these walls. The servants will follow suit, as they always do. Yet, as the butler takes his leave, a shadow flickers across the Duke's expression, a rare crack in his otherwise unshakable composure. His fingers tighten around the armrest of his chair, his mind circling a single, gnawing question: could the merman be making things worse? It's a possibility he hadn't seriously considered before, but now, it looms over him like a dark omen. If Mel is a threat to Servaine's already fragile condition, then there's only one solution. And the Duke has never been one to shy away from dirty work. Our female lead's father, the Duke, retreats into his thought realm, contemplating how to get rid of the merman once and for all. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Servaine's eyes flutter open, and the first thing she registers is pain, sharp, throbbing, and utterly infuriating. She groans, cursing her body for being as frail as a porcelain teacup in a bull's path. As her vision clears, something feels off. Her gaze sweeps the room, then locks onto the large tank near her bed, empty, completely empty. Disbelief slams into her like a carriage with no brakes. For a second, she wonders if she's still dreaming, but reality is far too cruel for that. With slow, deliberate steps, she approaches, placing a trembling hand against the cold glass. Then, the realization truly sets in. A scream rips from her throat, raw and panicked, sending her maids into a frenzy as they rush in, tripping over each other in their haste. "What's wrong, my lady?" they cry, their concern genuine, if not slightly exaggerated. Servaine doesn't waste time on pointless questions. "Where is he?" she demands, her voice sharp enough to cut through steel. But the maids shake their heads furiously, swearing they had nothing to do with the disappearance. Servaine's eyes narrow, her patience as thin as a spider's web. Without thinking, she seizes one of them by the arm, pulling her close enough to stare straight into her soul. The poor girl looks seconds away from fainting. But Servaine knows the truth, these maids wouldn't dare pull something this bold. No, there's only one person in this household who would even think of such an audacious move, her father, and she has absolutely no doubt about it. Servaine demands to know where her father, the Duke, is, her voice sharp with urgency. The maids exchange nervous glances before shaking their heads, swearing they know nothing. One hesitates before blurting out, "The lake," as if the word had been clawing its way out of her throat. That's all Servaine needs to hear. Without wasting a second, she bolts from the room, her maids scrambling after her, pleading for her to reconsider. "Maybe take a moment to breathe, my lady," one cries, another nearly trips over her own feet trying to keep up. But the young mistress doesn't spare them a glance. If she had wings, she'd be flying by now. The lake comes into view, and so does the horrifying sight, Mel, on his knees, with blades at his throat. The guards stand poised, awaiting the Duke's command, their faces unreadable. Servaine doesn't think, doesn't hesitate, she storms into the scene with enough force to make the wind itself pause. The entire area falls into stunned silence. Eyes widen, jaws slacken, and the Duke's fury is palpable, but our girl has no time for his anger. Her gaze locks onto Mel, his wide, tear-filled eyes pleading without words. Something inside her snaps. She surges past her father, throwing out a single, unwavering order: "Lower your weapons." The guards don't move. Instead, one steps forward, his voice clipped. "We follow the Duke's orders, my lady. His command outweighs yours." Our female lead clenches her fists, her heart pounding against her ribs. Oh, they want to play by the rules. Well, she's about to flip the entire game. Servaine fixes the guard with a death stare so intense it could make statues flinch. "Sheath your swords," she says, voice eerily calm, "unless they want to see what crazy really looks like." The guards hesitate before obeying, and the second their weapons are gone, she rushes to Mel, pulling him into a desperate embrace. But her father isn't swayed. The Duke commands her to leave coldly. He claims he's getting rid of the creature today. Tears sting Servaine's eyes, but she refuses to back down. "You gave him to me," she chokes out, her voice thick with emotion. "The only gift I ever loved, and now you want to rip him away." Her father's gaze hardens. He points out that her condition is worsening, and he believes in his heart that Mel is to blame. Something shifts in Servaine then, something dark and unwavering. Slowly, she rises to her feet, turning to face him with a look that could cut steel. "So, you really mean to take what's mine?" she asks, voice steady, dangerously sharp. "Fine, then she's not letting him go, not for the Duke, not for anyone." Her lips curl into something between a smirk and a snarl. "And if anyone so much as lays a finger on Mel," she promises to personally scour out their eyes. The air crackles with tension as the Duke stiffens, caught between disbelief and fury, but our female lead isn't finished. Her tone dips lower, a quiet, venomous promise. In fact, she murmurs, eyes glinting wickedly, she'll place a curse on whoever dares take Mel away from her. A shudder ripples through the gathered crowd, and in that moment, standing there like a vengeful goddess, she looks every bit the villain she's willing to become. Servaine secures the lake for Mel, ensuring it's his, at least for now, and spends as much time with him as she can. One afternoon, as they sit together, she gently suggests he return to the tank, convinced the lake isn't as safe as it seems. But Mel, with a sorrowful expression, simply shakes his head. He doesn't think it's safe like she claims either, he murmurs. "What's the difference? Here, the tank, neither is home." His words, so quiet yet heavy, strike a painful chord in her chest, and the tears shimmering in his eyes make it worse. It's heartbreaking, tragic even, but in some twisted way, there's beauty in it too. He's entirely hers in this moment, and maybe that's selfish, but she doesn't care. Without overthinking, she tugs him close and presses a kiss to his face, a fleeting moment of impulse that surprises even her. Honestly, she knows trapping someone in a lake isn't exactly a hallmark of affection, it's more possessiveness than anything, but love has never been something she plays by the rules with. One last time, she asks if he'll return to the tank, but his answer remains the same. With a resigned sigh, she lets him be, deciding she'll visit him every single day. And she does, without fail, until the day she returns to the mansion, and her maids intercept her with grim expressions. No more going out, they inform her, standing firm like tiny, determined gatekeepers. Duke's orders. Servaine blinks, processing the words, before scoffing under her breath. Of course, he'd pull something like this, because clearly, if he can't win an argument, he'll just lock her up instead, classic. The maidservant bows her head apologetically, but the tremor in her voice betrays her fear, as she repeats the Duke's decree, no more leaving the mansion. She urges the young mistress to focus on her health, insisting it should be her priority. But as our female lead sits in silence, her mind drifts to the past year, to the promise she made, to visit Mel every single day. Now, with her illness gnawing away at her, she can feel her body growing weaker, and the bitter reality of it stings. Shaking off the gloom, she turns to the maid and asks if the young maiden is literate. The question catches the girl off guard, but she nods. Servaine, satisfied, informs her that she now has an important duty, she will be a messenger. The maid, wide-eyed, hesitates, someone of her standing reading Ms. Noxirel's letters. It feels wrong, like touching something meant for nobler hands. But Servaine doesn't budge. She highly doubts Mel can read, and that alone makes this task non-negotiable. First order of business, check on him, she instructs. Report back to me. Without wasting time, she takes up her quill and pens her first letter, its contents simple but earnest, concern for his well-being, an offer to assist with anything he might need, and a single request in return. Just send me a response, she writes. Whatever you want, it will be done. And the moment I'm well, I'll come to you. It's a promise, one she fully intends to keep. The handmaiden returns, but her news is the same as always, Mel still refuses to speak. Servaine feels her heart sink, the weight of it pressing down like an iron chain. She's written countless letters, each one a desperate attempt to reach him, yet not a single reply has come back. Still, she doesn't stop. Every day, without fail, she writes, because it's the only connection she has left. Then, one fateful night, fever takes hold of her. She lies in bed, shivering, drenched in sweat, each breath coming in ragged gasps. Daphne, ever dutiful, rushes to her side, calling her name, a cup of medicine already in hand. Servaine struggles to sit up, her limbs sluggish, her body aching, but even in this state, her first question is about Mel. Daphne, watching her closely, sighs and shakes her head. Still nothing, she says, voice soft yet certain. But I know he understands you. She presses the cup into Servaine's trembling hands, her expression unreadable. Another letter, she asks, tilting her head ever so slightly. I'll deliver it, as always. Then she smiles, too wide, too still. Encouraging, yet somehow off. Servaine can't quite place it, but something about Daphne sends an uneasy shiver down her spine, colder than the fever itself. Enjoying this story so far? Drop a comment showing your interest in a part 2 and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Until next time, adios.